Welcome back to the deep dive. So we're starting today with a question that I think should haunt, well, every business leader, every policymaker, and really anyone just planning for the future.
hmm
Why is it that the threats we spend all this time and money preparing for, they're rarely the ones that actually show up?
It's a huge irony, isn't it? In all of strategic planning, we build these incredibly elaborate defenses, and then life just throws a completely different enemy at us. It's a pattern you see again and again.
And that failure of foresight, that's what we're decoding today. Our mission here is to do a deep dive into the systemic reasons we keep getting blindsided. We're synthesizing material on strategic adaptability, cognitive blind spots, and the history of what some are calling the vanishing apocalypse.
Right.
We want to show you how to stop, preparing for the wrong future and instead build a kind of resilience that works no matter what's coming next.
Think of it like this. The goal isn't to predict the next storm with perfect accuracy. It's just not possible. The goal is to build a boat that can handle any kind of weather.
Okay, so where do we start?
We start by recognizing why our own brains are, frankly, terrible navigators in this complex world.
All right, let's unpack that. Let's start with the flawed wiring that makes predictions so hard in the first place.
The first major error is, well, it's our tendency toward linear thinking. We think in straight lines, but we live in a curved world.
We're extrapolators.
We are total extrapolators.
Yeah.
We see a trend, and we just assume that line continues up and to the right forever, which is, a disaster in complex systems.
So if oil prices spike, we think, okay, gas is going to be $10 a gallon forever.
Exactly. Or if a company's profits shoot up, we assume they'll grow at 20% a year indefinitely. But systems have feedback loops, they have tipping points.
Right.
High prices trigger innovation, right?
Right.
They trigger conservation. And that often leads to a price crash. Success breeds complacency or attracts competitors, which causes that trend line to bend or even break entirely.
We see the line, but we miss the invisible mechanism that's already pulling it back down.
And that blind spot leads us directly into what's called the visibility trap.
The visibility trap. Okay.
This one is critical. The problems we can clearly see, the ones that are loud and obvious.
The ones all over the headlines.
Exactly. Those are the ones that get all the resources, all the political will, all the attention. The classic example here is Y2K.
Right. I remember that.
It was a genuine technical problem, no doubt. But because it was so legible, everyone mobilized. Governments, corporations, programmers, they all jumped on it, and they fixed it.
So Y2K was a crisis that was avoided precisely because everyone was panicking about it.
The panic solved it. And the flip side of that, the trap, is that the actual crises are usually the things nobody is watching. These quiet shifts just accumulating in the background.
Like what?
Think about the early social media algorithms being coded in the dorm room, or the quiet packaging of subprime mortgages into these really complex bonds. Those shifts were invisible to the big institutions until they basically detonated.
And that dynamic, it feels very connected to another bias from the source material, anchorage. Can you break that down for us?
Yeah, for sure. Anchorage is a fundamental cognitive bias where we rely way too heavily on the first piece of information we get, the anchor.
Okay.
So in foresight, we anchor on what matters now, and we completely fail to see that the rules of the game are changing.
Can you give us an example of that kind of institutional anchorage?
Sure. Look at the 1980s. The anchor then was manufacturing dominance, physical assets.
Right. Making things.
Making things. So when Japan had this huge economic boom, American policymakers anchored on that definition of power. They were terrified of a total economic takeover. And they were perfectly prepared for a world defined by steel and cars.
But they missed the curveball.
They completely missed it. They missed that the next era was going to be defined by software, by services, by digital platforms. It was a domain where America was quietly building this huge asymmetric advantage. We just project the present forward.
And to wrap up these cognitive failures, there's the fear factor. It really does feel like our brains are just designed to catastrophize, which is maybe why we're always planning for the wrong disaster.
It's all evolutionary wiring. Our brains evolved to prioritize danger. You hear rustle in the bushes, you assume it's a tiger.
Because being wrong and running away is fine. Being wrong and staying put is not.
Is death.
Yeah.
Exactly. That wiring is still there. So our brains magnify threats, and anxiety just rushes in to fill any gaps in our knowledge with the worst possible scenario.
So the tomorrow problem we're currently obsessed with, it often starts to shrink the second we actually look at it calmly.
Precisely. And the whole media ecosystem rewards this. Calm, structural analysis, it's boring, it doesn't get clicks.
Right.
Exaggerated threats and worst-case scenarios, they dominate the headlines. So we're constantly soaking in this world of, manufactured doom, and it pulls our focus away from the true, quiet shifts.
Okay, so our individual brains are basically prone to fixing the loud problem, missing the quiet one, and blowing the whole thing out of proportion. If that's true for us, how does that scale up inside massive institutions?
That's the perfect question.
Hmm?
Because those individual biases, they solidify. They become institutional structures. And when a bias becomes policy, we end up in what the material calls the Maginot Trap.
The classic idea of generals fighting the last war.
It's the definition of it. The Maginot Trap is this institutional commitment to preparing elaborately, obsessively for the previous crisis instead of the next reality. It's where we spend billions anchoring on the last thing that really scared us.
And the Maginot Line itself is such a perfect analogy here. After the bloody static trauma of World War I trench warfare, France built this incredible, impregnable defense.
That was a masterpiece of fixed defense, concrete, guns, everything. But when World War II came around, the Germans just didn't play that game. They used mobile, mechanized, fast warfare, the Blitzkrieg.
They just went around it.
They drove right around the fortress. France was flawlessly prepared for 1914. But it was structurally irrelevant for 1940.
And we see that same pattern in business all the time. It's not just military history.
Oh, absolutely. Think of Kodak. They didn't ignore digital cameras. They actually invested in them. But their whole institutional structure, their revenue, their culture, it was all based on perfecting film.
They were fighting to defend a market that was just evaporating.
Exactly. Or Blockbuster, frantically optimizing its late fee model right when Netflix was creating a whole new way of getting movies. They were experts at fighting a war that was already over.
But I want to challenge this idea for a second. If the system is so flawed, why was Y2K solved? I mean, doesn't the fact that we fixed that looming problem prove that collective foresight can actually work?
That's a really good question, and it's a necessary one. The key difference is between what we know and what we don't. Y2K was a known known. We had all the data. We knew the inputs. The scope was clear. The institution knew exactly where to aim the fire hose of resources. The Maginot Trap catches us when the threat is an unknown unknown, a threat that just doesn't fit the existing organizational chart.
So the next crisis always comes from the blind spot, the area we're not set up to even look at.
Precisely. You can get funding, you can get a promotion for solving the last recession or the last war. It's almost impossible to get traction warning about a threat that doesn't fit the current frameworks.
I see.
Look at the post-2008 financial world. For years, all the regulatory energy was focused on preventing another big bank from failing.
But the next big shock wasn't another banking crisis.
Not at all. The world got hit by a completely different enemy. Massive supply chain disruption, inflation shocks, geopolitical instability. They were defending the wrong trench because they were focused on the last legible threat.
It sounds like this kind of institutional failure is almost inevitable when the rules change. So if we can't trust the consensus and institutions are basically doomed to fight the last war, the only place to find real resilience is at the individual level.
Or at the small, nimble organizational level. And that means shifting our focus entirely. We have to move from trying to be better predictors to maximizing our optionality.
So the first takeaway is build optionality, not fortresses.
That's it.
Okay. Optionality sounds great in theory, but it also sounds expensive. Flexibility often means you're not perfectly optimized for right now. So how do you balance that?
It is a trade-off, but the cost of inflexibility is almost always higher in the long run. The goal is to keep your skills broad, keep your expenses flexible, and your commitments, where possible, reversible. The perfect plan for the wrong future, that Maginot Line, is the most expensive thing you can possibly own.
Right.
The person who can pivot quickly will always beat the person who made the perfect 10-year commitment to the wrong thing.
That makes sense. And if everyone in your industry is anchored on the same visible threat, the smarter move is probably to look somewhere else.
Absolutely. That's the second major strategy. Stop optimizing for the obvious threat. If everyone in your business is terrified of the same competitor or the same new AI tool, the real threat is probably coming from some quiet adjacent space you aren't even tracking.
So we need to ask that really hard question. What could make my skills or my business irrelevant in a way I'm not even thinking about?
And that leads right to the third point. Watch for the second-order effects. The real danger isn't the initial punch, it's the ripple effect of how the world reacts to that punch.
Can you elaborate on that, the second-order danger?
Sure. Don't just ask, what happens if AI gets 20% better? Ask, What happens when everyone assumes AI will solve every menial task and, as a result, stops developing critical human skills?
Like detailed research or editing or just structured thinking.
Exactly. The over-reliance or the underinvestment in response to the trend, that's what creates the real vulnerability down the road. The crisis isn't the technology, it's the human reaction to it.
That's a powerful idea. And strategically, if we're going to operate outside the consensus, we have to talk about investing opposite of the panic.
This is a huge advantage if you do it thoughtfully. When the crowd is terrified of a sector or a job type or a market, assuming you've done your homework and there's real value there, that is often the time to lean in.
When everyone else is laying off, that's when you find great talent.
That's when you find amazing talent. When a skill is declared dead by the media, that might be the moment to master it because the panic has created a vacuum.
And it seems crucial that we need to broaden our idea of preparedness beyond just money.
Definitely. Stop over-preparing for one specific doomsday scenario. The most resilient people focus on broad, non-specific resilience. Financial savings, yes, but also robust health, strong relationships, core competence. These things protect you from almost any future, whether it's an economic crash or a personal health crisis. You're trading obsessive planning for general anti-fragility.
And the final piece is more psychological. It's trusting our own hardware.
We have to trust human adaptability. The sources are so clear on this. We grossly underestimate how good people are at coping and adjusting. We handle breakups, failures, losses, embarrassment, and we find a way to carry on.
So when you imagine some crisis and think, I could never handle that,
You're almost certainly wrong. You could, and you would.
we have so much evidence for this pattern of vanishing apocalypses where the big crisis just fizzles. Let's look at a few, starting with maybe the most famous one.
Population bomb panic of the 1960s. This consumed global policy for decades. The thesis was simple. Population was growing exponentially, food supply was growing linearly, so mass starvation was inevitable.
And it was an all-consuming fear. It seemed like simple math. So what went wrong with the prediction?
The failure mechanism was technological disruption. The Green Revolution, new irrigation, high-yield crops, fertilizers, it completely decoupled population growth from starvation risk in most of the world.
And the predicted problem just never arrived.
It never arrived. And now, many developed nations are dealing with the complete opposite problem. Declining birth rates and aging populations. The existential threat literally reversed itself.
We saw a similar thing with the peak oil panic, right? We were told we were about to run out of oil any day.
That scarcity fear was everywhere. But again, technological innovation, shale extraction, horizontal drilling, efficiency gains, renewables, meant the worry shifted from running out of fuel to having too much fossil fuel and the climate challenges that come with it. The problem flipped from scarcity to abundance.
And this pattern holds up even in just the last couple of years. We've lived through a whole series of apocalypses that fizzled out.
The Europe energy crisis in 2022 is a perfect recent example. The consensus prediction was catastrophic. Mass deindustrialization, people freezing in their homes, all driven by the cutoff of Russian gas.
It felt existential at the time.
It did, but Europe diversified way faster than anyone expected. LNG terminals were fast-tracked, people conserved energy, and the whole crisis just accelerated the green transition. Prices stabilized without the predicted collapse. The apocalypse never materialized because human adaptability stepped in faster than the models predicted.
The same thing happened with economic forecasting. We hit 9% inflation in 2022, and the consensus was screaming about 1970 stagflation. A severe recession was supposedly unavoidable.
The narrative was overwhelming. Pain was necessary. But what happened? Supply chains healed, central banks acted, and inflation dropped from 9% down to the 2 to 3% range without that deep recession.
We got the soft landing that everyone said was impossible.
We did. Mostly because analysts misjudged the nature of the inflation. It was mostly supply-driven, not purely demand-driven. So again, the predicted apocalypse just failed to show up.
We can't forget the Great Recession of 2023, which was widely predicted and never happened. Even the initial panic around AI replacing all jobs immediately has shifted. It's disruptive, yes, but the conversation is normalizing, just like the internet did 20 years ago.
The pattern is relentless. Fear spikes, reality arrives, and the issue either shrinks, shifts, or is mitigated by our own adaptability. The problem you think you're preparing for is almost never the one life actually throws at you.
And that really brings us to the summary. Don't panic about tomorrow. Just keep moving forward. Prepare sensibly, not obsessively, and trust your own ability to adapt when the time comes.
And that confidence in our adaptability lets us embrace the final sort of provocative thought for you, the listener. Cultivate strategic ignorance of consensus narratives.
Strategic ignorance. That sounds risky. I mean, if I ignore the consensus, I might just look completely clueless until the day I'm proven right, which might be never. How do you manage that risk?
You manage it by focusing exclusively on what produces real value, regardless of the noise. Being too plugged into what everyone is talking about can actually make you dumber about what truly matters.
Why is that?
Because the discourse becomes this closed loop of confirmation bias. The consensus narrative is a trap. It tells you where you're supposed to allocate your fear, your time, and your money.
So the practical takeaway for you, the listener, is this. If you find yourself worrying about the exact same thing that everyone else in your industry or your community is worrying about, you are probably wasting your energy.
Either that problem is already so visible that massive resources are already being thrown at it, or more likely it's an exaggerated fear that's just diverting your attention from the quiet second-order curveball that's already forming in your blind spot.
So focus on the fundamentals.
Focus on fundamentals, build broad resilience, and the real problems of tomorrow will be manageable.
Excellent point. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into foresight failure. Until next time, stay adaptable.